welcome to our interview series with experts from various academic fields relevant to the war in Ukraine. My name is Hurrelmann, and I'm a research assistant at the Institute of European, Eurasian and Russian Studies at Carleton University. I'm working at the Observatory project for the war in Ukraine, which is hosting this interview series. Today with me is Achim Hurrelmann. Achim will give us some insight on how Western Europe is affected by the war in Ukraine and how the perception in Western Europe are like. Achim's main research interests are political discourses about the European integration and the EU-Canada relations. Achim teaches the politics of the EU and comparative politics of European states here at Carleton University. Hello, Achim.
Hi.
Let's start really basic. Can you give us an overview on how Western Europe has been affected by the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think the first thing to understand, particularly from a Canadian perspective, is that Western Europe has been affected way more directly by the war than Canada. Obviously, the war was a big shock and a very important event for Canadian foreign policy as well. And also, of course, because of the large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, it touches many people in Canada really, really at a personal level. But Canada's economic and political relationships with Russia were quite minimal already before the war started. And that is significantly different in Western Europe. My home country, Germany, for instance, had for a long time strong economic relationships with Russia, especially in the energy sector, but not only in the energy sector. There have been significant investments in Russia and a strong lobby of industrialists who had always, even when the relationship between Russia and the West deteriorated, who had always tried to protect the economic relations as much as possible. And in part, there was actually even a philosophy behind that, to say that by maintaining economic relationships, it is possible to influence the trajectories of the Russian regime and hopefully push Russia towards more democratic development. So with the war starting on February 24th, we have a deep, deep rupture in this discourse and in these types of relationships. We have suddenly the realization that energy from Russia is not safe, and Germany and other European countries cannot rely on Russia being a major energy producer. But that's what Russia was until February. About 40% of European gas came from Russia. So that meant very significant challenges to the energy supply and also quite significant disruptions in other fields of economic activity. So in that sense, the war has had a very strong economic effects on Western Europe. And of course, politically, it also had very significant effects. First of all, it made it very clear that any hope in somehow maintaining a constructive geopolitical relationship with Russia were, at least for the time being, without substance. I don't think very many people now still believe that Russia is a player to work with in Western European capitals. And it showed that the European Union has to get its act together in dealing with Russia geopolitically. But at the same time, it also made it clear that the European Union is very much dependent on NATO when it comes to securing the defense of European states. And I think all of the discourse that we heard within the European Union on strategic autonomy of Europe, on the EU perhaps becoming a stronger security actor, NATO perhaps becoming less important. We've heard much less of that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's because the invasion has made it very clear NATO remains the core security provider for European states. In that sense, there have been quite significant impacts of the war on Western Europe.
Okay, thanks. So you just told us how Western Europe was affected or is affected by the war. But I ask myself, what is the perception in Western Europe like? And is there a different perception in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe?
I think neither Eastern Europe nor Western Europe are really homogeneous in this respect. So in Eastern Europe, we have, for instance, the very significant and interesting divergence of positions between Poland and Hungary, which is quite noteworthy in the aftermath of the war. Poland and Hungary were allies in the European Union for many years, led by right-wing populist, often autocratic governments who were very skeptical of European integration and who were often criticized from Western Europe for policies that undermined the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the media, and raised questions about the rule of law. Poland and Hungary would always defend each other. And now we see Poland taking a very strong pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian position, while Hungary, under the leadership of Prime Minister Orban, is by far the most pro-Russian member state of the European Union. It has supported some of the sanctions, but the discourse of Prime Minister Orban has been clearly different from that of all other European leaders in emphasizing the need to find an accommodation with Russia. So we see that Eastern Europe in this respect is not homogeneous, and there are significant differences between Eastern European states. And the same is true within Western Europe, though perhaps somewhat less extreme. But certainly the situation of different Western European states and the way in which they are affected by the war is also quite different. Germany, we already talked about, is very much affected by the question of gas supply and energy from Russia. And so this is a big issue, but some other European states are much less dependent on energy from Russia, and that obviously shapes the discourse. But generally, I think in Western Europe, we've actually seen less dramatic divergence than within Eastern Europe in the response to the war.